$27 million the state has spent since 2020. And this is against the backdrop of these conditions in the prisons that are just absolute squalor, that the legislature has long said, well, we don't have money. We don't have any money to fix these problems. Well, we clearly have money to pay attorneys to defend the system.
Welcome back. Alabama Politics This Week. Josh Moon, David Person, and we are happy now to have back with us again. It's investigative reporter, freelance journalist, all around thorn in the side of the folks at ADOC because they need a lot more thorns. It is Beth Shelburne. Thank you, Beth, for coming on and spending some time so we can talk about the great work you've been doing here of late.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be back a third time. Third time's the charm.
Yeah. And let me just say I misspoke. I should not have said. I should not have added of late. You do have some very recent things that you have done, but the great work has extended well beyond these things. The stuff that you've brought to light in the prisons, I think, really have brought a focus on that awfulness that has been going on for a long time now. And so I don't want to diminish that just because you wrote some new stuff. But yeah, the new stuff is kind of what we wanted to talk about. You had a series that ran in the Alabama Reflector, and appreciate them, paying for good work because it was good work. And I believe it was I guess it was it maybe a series of 3, and then there was also an explainer of how you gathered the information as well that ran. And so I guess overview wise, what this series, what was it? What did you want to do? How did it turn out? Was it like you wanted?
So yeah, this was a heavy lift. We wanted to try to get a total picture of ADOC's legal spending, which is astronomical and really unprecedented. We sort of knew that already, but we didn't have the total picture. And so what I wanted to focus on for this series that we titled Blood Money, because we kind of came to view all of this cash flowing out of public coffers into mainly attorneys' pocketbooks as blood money, because it's all tied to abuse in our prison system. But we wanted to focus on not the big class action lawsuits that have gotten a lot of coverage over the last couple of years, the Department of Justice lawsuit against the entire system over unconstitutional conditions. We also have the big class action lawsuit over mental health care that's now in its 10th year of litigation. We knew that a huge amount of money has gone to pay for all that litigation. $39 million is what we had tallied up. But we wanted to look at what lawyers call retail lawsuits. So civil lawsuits filed by individuals in the prison system against individuals who work there. So we expected to find a lot of lawsuits tied to wrongful deaths filed by family members of people who have been killed in the prison system, medical neglect. And what was most surprising in this batch of lawsuits that we looked at in this particular time period that had ended in paid settlements between 2020 and 2024, the vast majority of the 124 that resulted in paid lawsuits were filed over excessive force. And that was something that I did not expect to find. I thought there would be some excessive force cases, but I didn't know it would make up the vast majority of this onslaught of lawsuits. So we wanted to look at the lawsuits themselves, what was being alleged, what happened during the litigation, why did they end in paid settlements, but we also wanted to study the financial impact of this. We're paying for it. We're paying for the lawyers to defend abusive officers. We're paying for the settlements. And we wanted to kind of get our arms around what this looks like for taxpayers, because nobody has been paying attention to this money. coming out of not our general fund budget, but the general liability trust fund, which is a separate pot of money that the state has created to pay out liability claims and defend state employees who are sued.
All right. So, yeah. Some more good news.
You can understand why it took me
Yeah.
6 months to do this reporting, because it was arcane and it was the most tedious investigative project I've ever worked on.
Well, and I'm sure the folks of the state were very happy to help you collect all of this information and get it right out to you in a easy to read format. Um,
Well, the Department of Finance did respond to my records request. That's how I was able to look at all this financial data, is they sent me the spreadsheets, but it wasn't a one and done thing. They hadn't really even prepared this data internally, so they had to kind of create um, materials that I was asking for from scratch. And I had to kind of keep going back to them and asking for more, asking for explainers. And they played ball with me. It wasn't always on my timetable, but
right.
they did respond.
Yeah, I will say, in my experience, the Department of Finance has always been one of the more forthright agencies that I've ever dealt with, and mainly it's because there's a bunch of number people over there, and they're just like, yeah, here are the numbers, take them. But I wanted to, so now we've all seen, like you kind of recapped to the beginning. We've all seen these problems, the really big ones, the lawsuits and all the other things that have come about. We've also all heard the stories of the guards being arrested for the contraband. We know we've had Chris England on a few times, and he's talked about the fact that during the height of COVID, there weren't the prisoners were not even allowed visits with their attorneys. So no one besides the guards were coming and going from the prisons every day. And yet somehow the overdose deaths and drugs in the prison did not lessen at all. So I guess my question, and maybe this is not necessarily fair to ask you, but is there any sense among these people that lead this state that we're doing a pretty poor job of hiring the folks that oversee our prisons? And listen, I'm going to put in the normal caveat here and say I know a couple of prison guards, okay, and they're good people who care. But I will also say they're good people who are vastly underpaid for what they do with and what they have to deal with and the danger that they incur on a daily basis. And so I can understand how that deters a lot of really good people who could go into our prisons because the pay and the benefits are not there, although they have upped them recently. But is there any sense that there needs to be an overhaul of who we're hiring or who's just currently there?
No. Except with Chris England and maybe some folks that will talk off the reservation about some of these problems, but won't do anything publicly. I think that you've put your finger on what is a major problem, and it is this corruption within this agency. I mean, reading some of these lawsuits with these harrowing accounts of officer abuse, the incidents felt more like gang attacks than they did excessive force, because you've got in these prisons sometimes a cabal of corrupt officers that will go after certain prisoners and target them for various reasons. Sometimes I think it's just sadism. I mean, the environment is so corrupt, and the power imbalance is there, as we know from like the Stanford prison experiment. It's ripe for abuse. The DOJ also named this as a major problem within the agency, and there's just been no public acknowledgement or acceptance of that by lawmakers. They would much rather talk about correcting the building infrastructure, building the new mega prison, and focusing on, I think, those aspects of this crisis that they're a lot more comfortable with. But that's really the uncomfortable truth, is we have a system that is full of corrupt individuals. And so far, the system itself has been unwilling to police itself. It's not just abuse, it's also just abysmal investigations internally. And we walk readers through several of those in the series. So I really had a hard time grappling with the just human cost of this series because the abuse is so grotesque that's detailed in these lawsuits. But I think I'm equally bothered by the lack of response from state leaders. It's just been crickets
Yeah,
from every office that I've reached out to, from the governor on down. I have reached out to the attorney general's office for months to engage with them on this, and I have gotten zero response.
yeah. The Cody Williams ordeal that he went through, where I mean, it was exactly what you described. It just seemed like a gang attack. Obviously that's his description of what happened. Is one officer punched him and threw him on the ground, and then the other officers who were there started kicking and beating him. And it was not a situation where he was threatening them. It was not a situation where he was running from them. They had asked him to go to the barber shop because they were questioning him about contraband that they thought was his. And when he refused to admit it was his, that's when they started the beating, according to his testimony. And obviously there had to be a little bit of truth to it because they paid out some money to him.
A lot of money.
Yeah, it's very, you hate to use words like troubling because it's such an inadequate word to say it's troubling. It sounds like, the normal naive guy on the outside. Oh, it's very troubling. But it's so, I mean, honestly, it's just disgusting, to think that we're operating this system and we're paying for it, and we're paying probably more money than we would if we run a good system.
Absolutely. I mean, we identified 17 million additional dollars that have been funneled into this litigation since 2020 that had not been publicly reported. And so you couple that with the 39 million that's come out of the general fund budget. Our spending over prison litigation, mainly to lawyers, okay? Mainly to private lawyers like the firm Butler Snow in Huntsville and various others that gobble up these no-bid contracts. $57 million the state has spent since 2020, and this is against the backdrop of these conditions in the prisons that are just absolute squalor, that the legislature has long said, well, we don't have money. We don't have any money to fix these problems. Well, we clearly have money to pay attorneys to defend the system. And that's part of the reason that I was interested in this is, these lawsuits that are resulting in paid settlements are an interesting cohort of lawsuits to look at because these are not frivolous lawsuits. I mean, you file a lawsuit, they don't immediately cut you a check. It has to go through several rungs of our federal court system. And a magistrate or federal judge has looked at the complaint, looked at the evidence that the prisoner or whoever filed with it, affidavits, medical records, whatever they submitted. The judge looks at the state's motion to dismiss, which is always filed. They'll file a motion to dismiss saying this isn't true. We claim immunity. There's not a credible claim here. And the judges are saying, nope, I'm not going to dismiss. This needs to go to trial and be heard by a jury. And so all that has to happen first, and then the state will start talking about settlements. So ADOC was very quick to tell me a paid settlement is not an admission of guilt or wrongdoing. Well, that's true, but it is a liability payment. And it is in some ways a victory for the plaintiff because they're getting something out of the system, some measure of accountability. But the state is doing this in astronomical numbers, 124 lawsuits that I identified since 2020 that have resulted in settlement, while they are publicly denying that there are unconstitutional conditions in the prisons. And so it's like these lawsuits are filed over the same conditions, over the same allegations. So it's almost like we've got a public-facing state saying, oh, no, nothing to see here. We don't have unconstitutional conditions, and we're going to use your money to fight the DOJ while quietly paying out all these lawsuits to make these individual lawsuits go away.
You know, Beth, I'm sitting here thinking how much I like having you on the podcast. But then when you come, I always also end up thinking, man, this is crazy, evil, just disturbing. There are not enough adjectives I can find.
Yeah, I don't know how she lives with it. I don't know how she. I don't know how you do it.
And what I'm wondering, honestly, is as you were describing this system, I mean, it sounds as though we've got a system. You use the word corruption, but it sounds as though we've got a system that isn't just corrupt in the prisons. It sounds as though we've got a completely corrupt political system, because you're also saying to us, you've reached out to the AG, you've reached out to the governor's office, and nobody cares. Nobody
Nope.
cares.
Mm-mm. Yeah, you're right. It's a really hard truth to kind of sit with, to do this kind of reporting and put all this information out there, which is outrageous on so many fronts, and to be met with silence. It's like, what do we do with that? It is hard. I will say personally, I have developed some coping mechanisms to deal with, the difficult subject matter. I bake. I'm in a disco dance organization that performs in full costume. I mean, I do things to kind of like find joy, but this topic and this crisis is really important. I think I'm now in my 13th year of covering ADOC, and the problems have gotten worse, not better. And so I think it's just really important, and it's on all of us to stay on top of it. And I'm happy to be the one to dig in and try to get to the truth of all this, because I'm an investigative reporter, and kind of like a bulldog. Once I get a bone, I'm not going to drop it.
So
So,
let me ask you this, Beth.
mhm.
How does Alabama stack up to other states? Do you have any sense of that?
That's a great question. And we really tried to report on some kind of state by state comparison when it comes to lawsuits, and there isn't data to access. No other state is like publicly reporting, oh, this many prisoners have sued our system and this many lawsuits ended in settlement. It's like really hard to track all that down, and no one really has a full picture. There are metrics that we can look at, and it's things like the number of deaths in our prison system, the number of suicides, the number of overdoses, the overcrowding. And by all of those metrics, we are, if not the worst prison system in the nation, we are one of the worst consistently. And I think that, that is the part that is the crisis that really needs to be dealt with first. All of this reporting that I've done is really the effect on taxpayers and sort of what's happening behind the scenes, that I think from a transparency standpoint is in the public interest to be out there. But as far as lawsuits, I mean, I talked to some prison experts. They also said, there's not really a database where we can like do a state by state comparison, but they thought the number of lawsuits that I found that had resulted in settlement, and just the number of lawsuits period, was extreme. And one former prison chairman from the state of Washington said, that's inconceivable to me, to have that many lawsuits against a prison system and nothing is happening internally to correct
Huh.
these conditions. He called it inconceivable.
Right. I wonder if one of the reasons that our politicians, our elected officials, seem to be nonchalant about all of this is that they think that the liability issue is really, relatively speaking, negligible, meaning the payout is negligible, the blowback, from even the Justice Department, relatively speaking, may be perceived as negligible. Do you think that's part of what explains, their lack of concern and their lack of responsiveness?
Yes, it's not their money. It's our money, and the General Liability Trust Fund is there for these kinds of situations. The problem is it's basically turned into a pot of money for the ADOC to use exclusively to handle its litigation, particularly concerning abusive officers. I feel like the prison horror show has become so normalized in our state that this kind of reporting that reveals this almost cottage industry that's like popped up around prison litigation, um, is these lawmakers kind of see it as like the cost of doing business. This is just part of prison, and that's a choice. It doesn't have to be this way. There are other states that have remade their prison systems. I visited the maximum security prison in Maine a few years ago. They don't have the same population that we have, so they only have one major maximum security prison for men. It's got about 5,000 people in it, so it's a big facility. But there was a group of leaders that went into that prison in the last 5-10 years that had visited Scandinavian prisons and decided, we're going to do this differently. This isn't going to be a police state. We are going to turn this into a truly rehabilitative space. And everybody's going to have jobs and go to classes and go to therapy. And I walked through that prison. I felt completely safe. There were therapy dogs. There were, prisoners walking all over the place. And everybody was, honestly in a good mood. They were all speaking to each other like human beings. And this was just policy changes that they made. They didn't have to build a $1.5 billion mega prison to do this. They literally just decided we're going to do this differently. They got everybody on board. They instituted some training, and they have zero violence in their prison. Zero. I asked them, how many people do you have in solitary confinement? None. The officers don't carry spray or batons. They don't beat people. They de-escalate things by talking it through. And it sounds sort of like a pie in the sky idea, but it can be done. I mean, it is being done. And so I have kind of come to view Alabama's prisons as a result of intentional policy choices that we have made over the years, our leaders have made over the years, and they're perfectly comfortable with it.
But are we talking about murderers and rapists and hardcore criminals in Maine?
Yeah, the same people getting convicted of the same kind of crimes that are convicted here in Alabama, all over the Deep South. I mean, you've got people serving time in prisons all over the country for the same things. People grab a gun and they shoot someone and they get convicted of murder. People deal drugs. People burglarize places. I mean, people do harm other people and they go to prison for it. This isn't a group of quote unquote nonviolent offenders in Maine. These are people that are convicted of rape and murder and burglary and robbery and all the things that people are convicted of here. They're just being treated in a completely different way.
Yeah, I've argued a lot that what we have is a result of intentional cruelty. That we've governed with this expectation of cruelty that and really we've instilled it in a lot of the population, that we want some form of cruelty to be present in our prisons because we feel like that's a deterrent. At least I say stupidly. I say it's stupid because honestly, it's just retribution. It does nothing to achieve the goals that we're seeking to achieve. Because if you're going to complain on one hand that we're going to be we're going to be paying to feed and house these folks for the next however many years, you can't make that complaint and then do the things that assures you that you're going to be paying for those people for the next however many years, and that's what we're doing. It seems is that we're continuing to stick people into dark holes and not care what's taking place there. And I don't see anybody, and maybe you've seen it somewhere, and so I'll ask, do you see any indication from anybody other than Chris England and a handful of the normal folks that we know that they've taken a look at the expenses, the embarrassment of the lawsuits, the embarrassment of having the Trump DOJ file a lawsuit against you because of this, the billions of dollars now that we're spending just to build a prison that's not going to alleviate the overcrowding issues, all of this collection of just pure awfulness. Not to mention the recidivism rate, that's not exactly something to be proud of either. Has anyone looked at this and said, none of this is working?
I think that there's a couple of lawmakers that are starting to see the light. Clyde Chambliss is one of them. But whether they're thinking about it in all the terms that you just mentioned, I don't know. I think that, it sounds kind of crass, but I think you guys will understand what I'm getting at. There's been a lot of young white men that have been victimized in this system, and their parents, who are people that look and sound like members of the legislature, have become really vocal. And I think that sadly is what it has taken to move the needle and get these folks' attention. But, I agree with you that there seems to be acceptance that cruelty is part of the game here and that it's perfectly acceptable. There's this notion that, prison shouldn't be easy. It should be hard. And we don't want to give people anything that makes it easy. Well, having your liberty taken away and put in a uniform with a number on it and stuck in a dirty cell for God knows how long is not easy, and that is the punishment and nothing more. So all these add-ons of like, we're going to throw drug trafficking in there and you're going to have dope all over the place. It's going to tempt you and you might get hooked on some stuff, and then you're going to get extorted by staff and other prisoners, and you might get trafficked and raped and thrown out on the sidewalk, because we've got homeless folks in our prison system. We have people that don't have a bed to sleep on. And the reason they don't is because gangs inside the prisons who run the contraband trade have taken over cell blocks. And, the guards are not doing anything about it. So we have folks sleeping on sidewalks, sleeping in day rooms, because they literally don't have a bed. And it's not overcrowding, it's mismanagement. And so there are, problems that are, just so mind-blowing in the system. Just the fact that some lawmakers are starting to pay attention to the horrific odysseys some of these family members have gone on when their loved ones were killed in some kind of awful, protracted way. The fact that they're finally paying attention, I think, is good, but I don't think that they are embracing, acknowledging, or looking into the sort of quagmire aspect of this, that there are so many problems, like where do you start? And then on the other hand, you have some who are in complete denial. I reached out to one Republican lawmaker to report my findings and explain to him, it's 124 lawsuits and it's cost X amount of dollars, $17 million, and the vast majority of them were over excessive force. And he said, well, that's why I support building these new prisons, is it's going to keep everybody safer. And so I pushed him and said, well, these aren't lawsuits about the prison structures. They're about guards abusing people. And when I say abusing, I don't mean slapping them in the face. I mean sending them to the hospital with multiple catastrophic injuries, broken bones, traumatic brain injuries, knocking their teeth out, giving them a concussion. I mean, it's just, these are horrific assaults. So I pushed him on it. And then he said, well, I mean, as long as you have gang members in there, there's going to be violent encounters. And it was just like every time I tried to sort of put the truth in front of him, he would go to some other defense mechanism to explain it away in a way that made him comfortable. So to call it an uphill battle to sort of win even the information on this is like putting it mildly. I think we have an empathy problem in this state. If it's not happening to your family or to somebody who then it's not happening. And that's certainly the case with criminal justice issues. There are people that care. There are people that work in prison ministry that feel, for these problems. But by and large, the population doesn't give a crap. If it's not happening to them, it's not happening.
Yeah, it's it's maybe the opioid crisis will save us from this one as well, because that seems to be where a lot of the folks that you mentioned, a lot of the white people ended up in prison. They've ended up there over the opioid crisis, and now they're experiencing the horrors that have been afflicted upon a number of Black and Hispanic and folks that for generations. And it's just, it's a shame that it takes more cruelty to somebody else to fix the problem. But hey, look, thank you for coming on.
Yes,
I know
yes.
you're going to get out of here and go directly to an Alabama legislature prison oversight committee, which has got to be an oxymoron in there somewhere. And so, but we appreciate you coming and telling people what's going on and the work that you do. Like I said during this, I have no idea how. I mean, it is just the most depressing thing. I mean, it's such fantastic work that you've done, but my God, it's so depressing. I mean, it's just listening to the people and the lack of empathy and cruelty. And
She's got disco, Josh. She's got disco, man. That's
right.
Right.
That's right.
Long live disco. No, I will tell you the other thing that I sort of rest in is the amazing strength that a lot of these people have that are in the system, to file a lawsuit without a lawyer, write it out longhand. The majority of these original complaints are handwritten, and that the complaints are uploaded into Pacer, the federal court system, and you can see them, and they're, scratched out, and some of the pages will have stains on them. I mean, these folks, it's a real testament to, people remaining strong in the face of horrific oppression and abuse. And then the families too, that continue to support their loved ones and fight for them. I hate that this is the situation that they're in, but I am like uplifted by the way that people persevere in this, and many of these prisoners that I talk to, can still have a sense of humor, can still find ways to make their lives meaningful in prison by doing art, by creative writing, by developing relationships. I mean, it's really kind of incredible. But that doesn't take away from the fact that these folks are being abused. And, I can't stand by and let that happen without speaking out.
Well, we certainly appreciate what you do. I know they do as well, and the state is better for the work that you've done and the light that you've shown on this stuff. And maybe one day, somebody will stand up and use what you've done here and make some of this stuff right. But hey, thanks for coming on, spending some time, and keep it up, hey, and I guess stay alive. Hey,
Thanks,
staying
y'all.
alive.
Thank y'all so much. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Bless
All
you,
right, thank
Beth. Bless you.
All right, that is Beth Shelburne. Y'all read her stuff, Alabama Reflector. Go and read the series. Let them know how much you enjoy it, so then maybe more folks will pass it around. Maybe more folks will hire her, and we'll pay a lot more attention to this stuff. All right, we're gonna slide out. We'll come back, wrap this thing up in just a minute. It's Alabama Politics This Week. Back in a minute.